Hello, this is episode 6 of the Never Alone Together podcast. I'm Gary Everett, and with Ian Henry, and our special guest today is an old school friend, Lee Cambule. Hi, Lee.
Good to see you, man.
How you doing?
Yeah,
right?
all good, mate.
Yeah, all good. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on, mate. We know you're a public speaker for mental health at the moment. Can you share some of your experiences of mental health, what you went through, and how you became a public speaker?
Absolutely. My story begins all the way back in my childhood. Pretty, what you would call an average childhood growing up, sort of decent family life, son of a migrant, working class family. Nothing really traumatic or difficult about my early childhood, but you start to, notice a few challenges. My eyesight was bad, little bits of, childhood teasing and bullying, nothing major, but I think it started to change around about the time I got to 14 years old, and then I did start to notice changes. I don't think there was a single point in which you suddenly said, I suffer depression from today. But there was definitely a steady incline in the way I was feeling and the struggles I was going through as a child. I put it down to a lot of different reasons. I was socially not full of confidence. I didn't have a lot of sort of very close friends in school, and a small family unit, which meant that I kind of kept myself to myself a lot. I wasn't very confident sort of in social circumstances. I was performing in school. I was doing all of the things you'd expect in terms of passing your exams. I made head boy in the school, all that sort of stuff. But it was getting to that point where I was starting to feel real self-loathing about myself. And I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't understand why I hated myself so much. But it was literally a case of I would look in the mirror and I would hate the reflection that was looking back at me. But I couldn't say why.
Yeah.
And I think that is when it really started to notice something was wrong. And it affected what I was doing with my family, my friends. I managed to pass my sort of school grades, but I went on to college then, and I really struggled in college.
Your social anxiety through the roof then?
So exactly, because college is very different social construct to school. It puts a lot more emphasis on you and your ability to take on those challenges yourself. Exactly, you've got to be in those situations.
There's a lot more pressure then as well, isn't there?
It puts a lot of pressure on you. I think I remember teachers in my secondary school pulling me to one side and talking about things like Oxbridge and what are you going to do with your future, and it puts that pressure on you. But I think when you then are struggling with just getting up in the morning, it just all tumbles downhill from there.
See, this is quite surprising for myself, because I remember you in school and I always thought that you were the kind of person who was confident and he was very intelligent.
And you would think that, because I put myself in the school plays. I was doing debate teams and all that sort of stuff. But behind it, there was a lot of, like I say, self-loathing. I didn't like the person I was. I didn't like who I was becoming. And I just felt that pressure to be a better version of myself all the time. And I pushed myself. I felt some pressure from others and from outside that I couldn't control. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Outwardly, I may have looked like I was in control,
so
but
like you're being someone else in school and then being someone totally different outside.
Absolutely, you felt that. And like I say, particularly that step up then, so about 17, 18 years old, everything's changing anyway. You start, you learn to drive, you're going into social situations, you get exposed to, smoking and drinking and all that sort of stuff. And it puts a pressure on you then to make a judgment about that type of person you want to be. And I just got it all wrong. I didn't know what the person I wanted to be. I put a lot too much pressure on myself, and that self-loathing just kept getting stronger and stronger and bigger in my thoughts. So round about either side of my 18th birthday was when I had my two, I like to call them near misses, but I came very close to taking my own life on 2 occasions. The second time particularly, I was ready to do it, but my difficulty, my saviour really, was the way I put myself across in a public place. And it just put me in that position where there were too many people around me that almost that influence stopped me from taking that final step, which
the fear kicked in.
Kicked in, but in a strange way, I was brave enough then to turn away from it, and I didn't recognize that at the time. I thought I was running away from the problem, not going towards it. So those were kind of the two incidents, no one really knew about it. I was on my own. I was in a public place, like I say, and I had every intention of going through it. Things stopped me from doing it. But everything changed for me a few months later then, when I remember coming home from college one day and everything was just too much for me. So I was still living at home, my parents and my sister there. So I came in one day, they were all at school or at work. So I was there on my own. I went up, I trashed my room, smashed everything, pulled things down from the wall, and I just fell on the bed almost like comatose. I just had enough. It was just like a total mental breakdown. And then my sister came home from school. She found me, she called my parents, they called the doctor. And that was the start of everybody realising how bad my problem was.
So that was the first time they'd noticed anything through...
I'm sure there was sort of subtle signs that like my behaviours and things like that. But there was nothing to say how extreme it was until that moment. And I think my family, who were brilliant throughout, hadn't had that opportunity to recognise it. That I hadn't given them the signs because I'd hidden it all away. I'd buried it all in, and it was burning inside me, not building up, being visible to them. So
did you feel like that moment was like a turning point, or like an understanding that there was
people to help you as well?
Yes, definitely. It's certainly now I look back on it after all those years, I didn't recognise it at the time as being the turning point that it was. But you're absolutely right in it. It's kind of one of those things where if things had gone slightly differently, I may not be here today talking. So
very powerful, isn't it?
But that's kind of where then, in fairness, things did start getting better for me, because I had my family support. I remember I was recommended by the doctor who'd come out to see me to get some counselling. That kind of through the NHS as a service user, that sort of counselling didn't really work for me at the time. It was a very small amount of sessions I had, and I clammed up myself, and I purposely didn't speak what I was truly feeling, because I didn't feel confident enough to be able to do that. It was only until a bit later, when I realised the things weren't getting any better, I started then seeing a counsellor in my own. I started paying for the sessions, and I was going to that counsellor for 15 months every week.
How did that do for you? What was your approach there with that counsellor? Because not everyone can sit on one-to-ones, can they? No,
indeed. And in fairness, a lot of what I went through in that experience was it was things like cognitive behavioural therapy, doing some training, not a lot of talking. It was more trying to change my mindset and my behaviours and things like that. And I think that did have an effect. I remember shortly after I finished with the counsellor, I was in town. I took my mother shopping. She needed some help. So I remember I was at the taxi rank, and these two old ladies just tried to cut in. Nothing wrong with that. The old me would have just been quietly sort of like there and just, wouldn't have had the confidence to say anything. But the new me that the counselling had helped bring something out to me, it did have a word with them. And, we're polite and nothing wrong with it. But I remember when we got in the taxi, my mother said, "You would never have done that before." And it just changed something in me. And that was the start of really the next X number of years of me starting to come to terms with what it was like to live with depression and to build that into the person who I was.
Was you ever like on any medication? Or
I did spend a little bit of time doing antidepressants that I didn't find effective, and I talked about it with my GP then felt that wasn't the path I needed to go down. I think I've got a very rational mindset, so for me, the troubles were that I couldn't rationalise in my head why I felt the way I did. I was hating myself. I was literally looking at myself in the mirror and hating the reflection, but there was no justification for it. There's no rationale. So I needed some help to kind of work that out and work out why I was feeling like that. And the prescriptions wouldn't have done that. Medication would have levitated something, but nothing would have fixed.
The fixing of it,
I'd say everyone is different. The way they need to get over it. Anyway, not everyone gets suited for medication, and
no, that's right.
I know someone I was on antidepressants, and they got to take those different strengths.
Absolutely.
They start taking one, and one's not enough. One makes them sleep, or one makes them feel that they can't get up and do anything.
So always affects from it.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone is different. You're absolutely right, Gary. It's one of those things where you almost have to do that trial and error to work out what is the right solution for you. It may be talking therapies, it may be medication, it may be, a lot of people find sort of like meditation and that calmness work and mindfulness, all those sort of things could really be beneficial for someone. But until you try it, you don't really know, and you've got to work out what's right for you.
And what did after that then, when you knew that one right for you, what was the next step you took then? How did you get into speaking? And
so for a few years it kind of just plateaued a little bit. I think it got to the point where I was living with depression. I was on my own a lot. I didn't have a big social circle. That changed in my 30s then, when I started becoming a bit more outgoing, and eventually I started to settle down and married. Everything was going fine, and then my first marriage came to an end, and it kind of really hit me hard. There was a moment where I almost felt on the brink of that third threat of suicide, and
it was creeping back in.
And this time, at least I saw a rationale. I wouldn't say it was justified. I would say I could see a link between my life situation and the way I was feeling. Before, I was feeling all these horrible, dark thoughts, but I couldn't put a reason behind it. So this time, at least, I think I had more of the mental strength that I built up over the years to say, hang on a minute, let's look at this rationally, let me work out how I'm feeling, and then I can work myself from that. And thankfully, I literally pulled away from the edge there, and I said, no, I'm not going to go down this path. So a few months later then, I had the opportunity to volunteer for an organisation called Time for Change Wales. You've probably heard of them. The National Anti-Stigma Mental Health Campaign. And through work, I managed to get the opportunity to get some training with them and talk about my history. And that was really the first time I started openly telling people about what I'd gone through and building my story in a way that I could share it with others. And it kind of went from there then. I was volunteering them. Well, I still am when I can. But, I volunteer with them to help raise awareness and to tackle stigma and discrimination around mental health. But also what came from that was I got a lot of sort of interest from people about, can you come and talk to our staff? Can you come and help us with our events? Can you come and, I got doing interviews with magazines, doing things online. At one point I was called to give evidence at the Women and Children's Committee in Parliament. They were doing an inquiry on mental health for men and young boys. Right. And as a service user and someone with experience of talking about this, I went up to London and I went and I gave my evidence and I talked about what it was for me, my experience. And it just kind of opened up the world of, you can actually influence with your story and make a difference in people's lives. So I've just gone from strength to strength.
Did you see was it nerve-wracking at first? Was it, and then you had to build it?
The first
you do.
Talk to you how to do it.
You do, and depending on the audience, I've spoken in front of hundreds of people at a time, standing on stage, bright lights, all that sort of stuff. And then I've done things on interview on emails. I've done interviews on line, Zoom and all those sort of modern things that you do with Teams and everything. I've given lots of talks to lots of different organisations, and they've all kind of come back with positive feedback about the importance of the story. Like I say, I don't do this there's no gratification behind it. There's no, I don't get anything out of it apart from the chance that my words will impact on someone
and help someone else.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why we're happy you're here, because we're looking for the same message, really, to for the listeners who are listening in.
Definitely.
To, if there's anyone out there who's actually suffering at the moment in silence, Never Alone Together, the podcast, and Lee Cambule with the Man Up public speaker. That's what we're looking to do, is to help as many people as we can.
Definitely.
So, could you tell us a bit more about the Man Up?
Yeah, I'm very happy to. So this started a couple of years ago when I was being called out of the blue to do lots of interviews and stuff like that, and I spoke to a couple of people and they were saying, well, if you've been asked to do it anyway, why don't you just kind of make that your business? And so I did some work with Business Wales, and I started looking at the logistics of setting myself up as a public speaker. And there's some fantastic mental health speakers out there who do a lot of stuff online, who have their own businesses, who have gone around the world talking about this sort of stuff. And for a while, it gave me a little bit of it, like that imposter syndrome.
Yes, yeah.
That idea about, my problems aren't that bad. How can I go
Everyone's
out there and do what
different.
they're doing? But I started to realise then, the more I talked about it, more people were saying, no, but Lee, your story does kind of resonate.
With other people,
and maybe not in the sort of the extremities of, people who have gone through very extreme challenges in their lives, poverty and all sorts of different issues that drive people to their mental health problems. But that sort of everyman sort of story about, people just struggling with day-to-day life.
Yes, yeah.
People from certain backgrounds or from certain social situations,
trauma.
Trauma, absolutely, things that they can or can't explain, but they still feel in the same way.
Yeah.
So I set up the Man Up public speaker. We launched it last year to just kind of test the waters and get some, I do a lot of blogging. I do a lot of, like I say, not just the talks, but I've done articles and things like that. And it's just all about getting the message out there.
Yes,
it's the same as what you two are doing. It's fantastic to have more voices that are saying the things that people want or need to hear.
Yeah.
Do you contact the firms or businesses then to see if they've been talk, or do you get contacted? Do they ask you to? A
lot of the time, my sort of my reputation has preceded me to a degree, but I'm going to be more proactive with this now, because I do see there is a more of a cause for this than ever.
Yes,
I think with the cost of living crisis, with
It's definitely going up.
There's so much evidence that mental health is becoming more of an issue. 1 in 4 people any year.
Major part of society now.
It is, and I feel like a lot of organisations are struggling with the cost of living crisis themselves. They haven't maybe got budgets for doing big events to raise the awareness and profile of mental health. So I want to do more to kind of put myself in, at their service basically, and to give them that opportunity. But it's all about just getting the stories out there, because stories are so powerful. And the people that you've had on your podcast have just shared stories that only takes one person to hear, doesn't
100%.
it?
Yeah, exactly.
One person could hear that and it could change the course of their life. And that's
I
what we
think
do.
with the difference is where we individually have been through the dark moments where we can help.
Yes.
And we understand the people who are suffering. So, any of the listeners that are listening in and thinking you're on your own, you've only got to look at us.
It's not easy to talk, but so that if enough people do it, they can get the help they need.
It's so important to get people to understand that message, that talking is the first step on that path.
Yes, yeah.
It's not the solution. And I think sometimes that does muddy the waters a bit, that people think that the first time they open up, it's all going to be fixed the next day, sort of thing. Yeah. But it is the first step on that path, and we want more people to recognise that. And I remember doing a talk a few years back where I'd gone in, I'd done the talk, it went fine. I was packing up at the end, and a gentleman came up and spoke to me afterwards and thanked me very much for the talk. Really, appreciated what I'd done and the courage I had to kind of stand up and say it. And he told me that he wished he'd had this earlier because his son had taken his life.
Yes, yeah. And
when I heard that, I just thought, if I could be doing this more, if I could be getting these messages out there, then maybe I can stop that next person who may be at the brink of that. So that's exactly why I'm doing it, and that's why you are doing what you're doing as well. It's fantastic.
Do you still feel that, as well as helping others, you're still helping yourself get through what you went through in the past? Do you still get your moments and days? So this is like, it reminds you of what you went through as well.
Oh, definitely. There's so many times when I've stood up and I've shared my story, and a moment of that story might just reverberate with me, and it might just I did that, didn't I? That was really difficult at that time, but now I'm talking about it years and years later, and we're talking about 20 plus years of not just living with depression, but learning to live with depression. And you look back and you go, if I could have done something different, or if the situation had been the other way around, or things like that. But yeah, there's so many different ways that you could just explore that and just share it in different ways. Like I say, I do blogs, I've done lots of online content, talk to magazines. One of the things that I've enjoyed doing is creative writing. And years and years ago, I wrote a book from the perspective of the 15-year-old me who had been suffering from depression and wouldn't speak about it. And I published that book 2010. And it's never going to set their bestseller charts alight, but it was my way to get that feeling, that experience that I had, to share it.
Yeah.
You know, say we didn't have podcasts back in 2010, did we?
That's right, exactly.
But what we had was ways that we could creatively share our stories, and I took that book and I got it out there, and I would use it then in my talks. I would tell people about the experience. Funny enough, what I said earlier about the doctors, not talking in front of the doctor when I was doing that, I put that straight in the book. There's a scene in the book
so
specifically like
tell
that.
Tell the listeners what the name of the book is.
Oh yeah, of course. It's called Demons Inside, and it is about the we can't defeat the challenges that are in our lives without really facing the demons that are inside us.
Yeah,
you need help to do that. I think that's the key message, you know, and I think a creative way of showing that
you can't do it on your own, like you need
exactly. That's a big moral of that particular story that I wrote, but it's just a way of just showing the story and getting people to, you know, if someone picks it up and reads it and go, I can associate with that. That is actually helping me.
Yeah. So where would they be able to get the book then?
It's all online. Like I say, it's all print on demand these days. So you know, it's all you can check out my website, and you know, there's opportunities for people to go to the links on there.
We'll add the links onto the
brilliant
onto the podcast so they can check it out. Then
they're very welcome. Only because, like I say, this isn't a plug or anything.
No.
But like I say, there's so many different ways to get messages out there.
Oh yeah.
And I know people who read this book and come, you know, like emailed me afterwards and gone, oh, this has really helped. Thank you. You know, and you just do what you can. But you know, I just try to share my story and get the message out there, that particularly about talking. Like I say, it's so important for people to talk, and then to tell everybody else that it's okay to listen as well.
Yes,
yeah, exactly. You know, like as in when you're up there talking to people, have you ever realised that like suddenly someone decides to come on to you at the end and like ask like how like they've been quiet maybe and they haven't said it before, and then they come on to you?
Oh yeah, I did a talk for International Men's Day a few years back, and it was such a shame that I kind of had to leave that event early because I had another meeting to get to. So I didn't stay around very long, but I was talking to people and I got to know people. And then later on, people were messaging me through the contacts via the event. And that sort of like people just saying, you know, it was inspiring, or, you know, couldn't believe what you went through. Your story has kind of made me realize what men are facing and the challenges that they've got. So yeah, you know, even like when you stood up there on the stage or whatever, you know, you're going through your story, you're practicing the things that you know, and you're talking from the heart. But it's not until you hear it back, like echoing back to you from other people, that you realize it's making a difference and it's sinking into people. You know what I mean?
Exactly. It takes time to sink into people. That's the thing. But I do believe there's a lot of people out there who haven't really opened up yet as well. And I feel like something like this, like the Man Up, it would help a lot of people.
Yeah. Do you do it all weekend? How many times a week?
It depends on sort of jobs you've got on. I try to, like I say, it's been very difficult with the cost of living crisis and things like that. That people have prioritised making sure that everything has got some sort of support in place. So mental health talks and activities kind of dotted throughout the year. Key things like World Mental Health Day in October, you know, International Men's Day. You know, you kind of have those sort of key milestones that you kind of work around. But you know, like I say, I did one last year for the RAF, and it was just linked to an event that they were putting on for their teams. So they asked me to come along and do a talk, and I shared some of my story and my presentation, and it worked for them. It was what they needed to hear, and it fitted in with what that business wanted from me at that time. So I'm happy working with anyone, basically.
Yeah, that's brilliant, isn't it?
Do you sit in groups and that as well? Any mental health groups? No, do you sit then?
I've been to a couple. Yeah, I went to one in a boxing club once, where we were literally all sat around in a circle. You know, discussing the finer sort of aspects of mental health, and given boxing being a sort of a certain male orientated historically sort of sport, it was one of those things where it was all about breaking down the stigma and letting people see that, you know, it's not just about showing how tough you are or things like that.
Have a go on the bag and then have a sit and have a chat about it.
It's great actually as a form of release and as exercise and as an outlet. But it's all about channeling that in the right direction. And I think, again, sport is a fantastic way, not just of channeling emotions and behaviours and things like that, but actually there's a great camaraderie in sport. And like you say, you know, from like football teams or rugby clubs or whatever.
The team was best thing about growing up, I think, being
Yeah.
part of a team.
That's
Because you
it.
do have that, where you leave the house, you haven't got no school, you're just there with your friends,
Yeah.
playing football. And
We used to be the same, innit? The
That's
three
it,
of us
yeah.
used to play after
even
school.
even though in the team, just going at the park, having to kick around.
Jumpers
you
for
know what I mean?
goalposts and all that sort of stuff, innit?
Yeah, those are the
100%.
days.
Yeah.
weren't they?
I think some children now, they feel isolated, especially after the pandemic.
Of course,
they
yeah.
had to stay away from their friends for so long, and since they've been put back into society, they can't really deal with the challenges now, and the big groups, and they're still a bit paranoid to think about,
Yeah.
about the pandemic and just getting used to other people.
It's like what you're saying there. Is like I missed that when I was growing up. Like we go over the park straight from school to play football, and we'd all meet up, wouldn't we? And
Yeah.
like have big
Kick
games
arounds.
and that.
Yeah.
And it seemed like those days would last all the time. And then suddenly you're at a point where you're like, I'm on my way now to go to college.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you've all split, and then
Go separate ways.
and then you've got
You
to
lose
walk the-
some of that camaraderie, don't you?
Yes.
You lose those connections
Life
and those
changes,
friendships
yeah.
that you've got. That's
then
where I
when you
struggle.
come together again like this now, you talk
nothing's
and
happened.
it's like you haven't been away. You know,
Yeah.
that's the best thing about it. And I think if only we could hold on to those moments where you know, you work together to build up something that is helping each other. And I think that's a good way forward. Then what you're doing is amazing.
Oh, thank you.
It really is.
It's just trying to, like you say, to keep some of that emotion going, isn't it? Is to keep
Yeah.
that sort of sense of people having something to hold on to and having people that understand them in their lives. And like you say, when you've got that, like you say, when you're growing up together in groups and in friendship, those relationships are, where they can be maintained, they are strong.
Yeah.
Like if you've got a friend from when you were a child and they've lasted with
yeah.
you for 20, 30 years, they're strong bonds,
Yeah.
and they're the ones that can help you the most. They might be the first person you go to about
Yes,
I'm
yeah.
struggling with my
Trouble.
mental health. But
That's
you need
like
more
me,
of those.
Me and Gary were in school together from nursery.
That's
Like,
it,
and
innit? Like
we
you
still
two.
sitting here. That's
Yeah, crazy.
says it all, doesn't it?
But I think that's what it is. I think a lot of that changes society now. You don't see so many groups of kids. Even with football, it's less teams now, less divisions. Everything seems less. It's not enough much for the kids to do out. There's not group activities to go to, and I think having that social bond with teams is a massive thing of growing up. And a lot of kids feel isolated now, I
The
think.
society's changed,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it
That's
has.
the problem.
I think going back a long time, there was a lot more toxicity, probably the better word, around. So, there was still a lot of competitiveness in
Yes.
sports. There were sort of, people who were taking the sport too seriously, people who just wanted to have a bit of fun.
Yeah.
Whereas it wasn't really a bonding exercise. I think, in fairness, from some work I did when I used to work in the third sector for a mental health charity, and I know they did a lot of work with sports organisations to try and address some of that and to make it, particularly from a young age, that grassroots sort of stuff, to make mental health part of the conversations and the topics, and then to build that throughout the generations as you grow up. And like you say, as you take it in, you're coaching kids football and things like that, you pass in those thoughts and those behaviours down to the next generation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's really important.
I think that like when you find somebody's potential in life, I think a lot of people have got potential, but they can't fulfill it because there's not much scope for them to be able to open up to different channels. And I think that's I believe that's what's missing from our society is like, preparing those people and saying, you've got this in you and you can develop this.
Give them the right support to develop it.
And push them to do what they love to do. Because I think everything today, is coming down to a lot of money. And that
Sadly.
then stops the person from being able to do the other things that they...
There's a phrase we use in my sort of day job around, which I do around tackling poverty, but it's poverty of opportunity.
Yeah.
It's the lack of not just resources and money and things like that, but it's the lack of chances that people have to improve their prospects for the future.
Yes.
And particularly, like I say, when you're in poverty and things like that, people are being born into poverty, generational poverty. They haven't got as strong a chance, if you like, of clawing their way up to that point where they're not only escaping poverty, but they've got the chance to build a better, brighter future, for one of a kind of phrase. But you're absolutely right, Ian. There's so many challenges put in front of people, particularly young people when they are growing up. They need all the support they can get. And I think the more they know that there are people who can listen to them, who can support them from any source, not just the professionals, like you say, go to your doctor, go to your, teachers, whatever it may be, but, more community groups, more people that are in trusted positions of power that, you can reach out to, like counsellors and so on, and you could say, yeah, I need help. Can you help me find the support I need?
We need more of that. Do you believe yourself that there's enough support out there, or do you think there should be a lot more?
I'd always love to see more. I'd always love to see more hyper-local stuff. Literally, you could go around the corner and find someone on your street that has the information and the knowledge and the experience to help you with your mental health. And I think also earlier in life as well. I think when I was in Parliament and giving the evidence, one of the things I remember clearly saying is it needs to start as young as possible. So the
schools,
it's the schools, it's not just the teachers, but the after school clubs, the people who provide those sort of support services, daycares. They all need to understand the impact that these things have on the long-term development of children. And until we get some of those messages right, and until we do more to kind of support the continuing development, like you say, children are going to hit that wall then when they are kind of leaving schools, college, whatever.
More when they're younger, it will help them as they grow up.
More resilient. And I think that's the key word that I see a lot of in the work I've done is resilience. You can't expect to prepare everyone for every challenge life will throw at you. But what you can do is to make them resilient and strong enough to be able to stand up to the challenge. And I think that's what I like to do, is really kind of help people to understand how to make themselves more resilient and what they've got to do to be better. And it's different for everyone.
And I'd say a lot of it is confidence, isn't it?
It's
being confident
confidence
enough to do that.
I think for me, when I was growing up and thinking back on my story, it was understanding the type of person I was. Like you said, outwardly I might have seemed very confident and things like that, but I knew that internally was where my problems were. So when I started doing that, and as I started in work, I started exploring a bit more about my personality types, the sort of the psychology basically of what makes me who I am. And then by understanding myself more, I was able to understand what I needed to do, what I needed to change, what my strengths were, which was really important. Like I say, I could build on that outwardly confident expressionism that I've got and turn that into something like public speaking.
Which is brilliant.
It's amazing.
So that's what you've got to do, isn't it? You've got to try and take those strengths, build on them, and look and get the support you need to kind of help you with the rest.
If there was a listener out there now who wasn't so confident in speaking and opening up about things, would you advise them then to get in touch with yourself and then they can do that in their own time? Always.
Well, and anyone, I think people have to figure out who they feel most confident talking to. And I think that's sometimes the difficult bit. It's like I said, the example I gave when I went to the counsellor within the GP surgery, and that wasn't the right person for me. That was not the right situation.
It's different for everyone.
I didn't feel like right in opening up. For a complete stranger, that might be a better situation for someone. Say, for an old school friend, that might be the right person. Or for, perhaps a long lost relative or whatever it may be. You've got to kind of think in your mind, who would I feel comfortable saying those words out loud in front of?
Which is that's what happened to me. I needed somebody to be there that I had the comfort of being able to approach in a comfortable manner. And it just happened that Gary was the one who came and seen me, and from that moment then that's how this has developed. Never Alone Together podcast is coming from that moment of initially opening up. It's opened up so many avenues of helping others, and I can see familiarities between ours and yours, and coming together now, it seems very powerful. And
it does. I think your story is particularly powerful. There's a phrase I learned, like I say, with creative writing and stuff like that, I've always been interested in stories and books and things like that. There's a phrase I learned from the author J.R. Tolkien, the guy who wrote Lord of the Rings, and he coined this phrase, eucatastrophe. Don't know if you ever heard of that.
I'm glad you didn't say my precious then.
No, that's a different phrase altogether. But he coined this phrase of eucatastrophe, which is basically the opposite of a catastrophe. So a catastrophe is when everything seems great and then all of a sudden something suddenly happens that turns it all dark. But the opposite can happen when you feel like you've been in the darkness for so long, and all of a sudden this one moment flips it all on its head, and there's suddenly just opportunities and lightness ahead of you. And I think that's a fantastic sort of not just a phrase, but an ideology really for this sort of things, that you can live in depression, anxiety, can live with mental health conditions for so many years, and it just takes one moment, and maybe the darkest moment, to turn it all around. And I think that's
it is a light at the end of the tunnel,
and that's a powerful message, isn't it? That there is hope, like, ahead for people who are struggling. Like, it
may come over a course of time, years. Like it was with me, it was a very slow process. Really, I probably kind of had a leap, like I say, after I started speaking to the counsellor. But it probably took 12 years before I was able to start talking about it. Or it could be a sudden instance, like you say, where it just turns around and you've got that one person that comes forward and can be a saviour, and then can just make things, suddenly look like the future has possibilities. So
definitely, yeah.
All possible.
Like, the only downside I see of things is that, like, the stigma's still there with the mental health side of things.
It absolutely is, unfortunately.
And I wish there was, like, a way where we could cure it, as, like, it's just about coming together and talking, I believe, and like, understanding. And once you've got that understanding, I think then, like yourself now talking to people, it opens up the avenues then for them to give.
Some of the best talks I've given have been to, like, senior managers, or people who perhaps are in care in situations, like nurses. I've done some with the NHS before. You kind of talking to people who need to understand things like empathy, need to understand things like looking at things from a different perspective. And once you get those messages across, it's really powerful then to change people in that position, if you like, a position of power, to start thinking about these things in a different way, and that can help.
They could be dealing with people suffering every day, so
Absolutely.
they've got to know how to approach them and how to talk to them as well, because it's if you say the wrong thing can trigger some people off sometimes, and so you've got to have the right attitude, I think, towards helping people.
Absolutely. I remember learning about the difference between sympathy and empathy. And I can already think about people that I've, like, worked with in the past, or people that I've come into contact with who get sympathy. Oh, they're there, that type of stuff, but can't put themselves in the other person's shoes. And I think when you learn to do that, you can become a better listener. You can become a more helpful colleague, or partner, or whatever it may be. And empathy is such an important tool to helping tackle the stigma. Because then you can see it from the other person's point of view. Then you can understand, oh, actually, if I behaved in this way, or if I did this thing, it can have a really bad impact on this person, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah. And I also found, especially when COVID was around, I realised the most important things in life more than anything.
Yeah.
And I think it's because we had more time when COVID was around just to contemplate everything. And I started to kind of understand myself more on the journey then, of, like, seeing that community was starting to come together to help each other in the most, darkest moments. They were there, weren't they?
People dropping, if people are suffering, dropping
helping
food
each other,
off, dropping the shopping off to the houses.
The thing I'm frustrated with is that, like, now all that has subsided, I feel like it should be more now that everybody helps each other.
We're kind of at the cusp of that, aren't we? Because as the pandemic starts to ease off, as hopefully the cost of living crisis will eventually start to dissipate as well, we've got the opportunity to keep all that good stuff, that community spirit, and that let's help each other, and let's set up the things locally that will help people, the resources, the facilities, things like that. And if we're not careful, we're going to forget all of that stuff, and we're going to forget what difficulties we had to endure during the pandemic to realise those things were necessary. So it's really important that I think we learn from that, and that we keep promoting it. I think there's lots of ways to talk to, like you say, talk to local councillors, talk to MPs, talk to people in charities and things like that who are campaigning for this stuff, and we can get all those voices heard. It'll just keep all that good stuff going. We need to do more of that.
I walk around Swansea sometimes, not just Swansea, but around different places, and it's a thing where I see buildings that are empty, and I think they could be filled with this type of thing. Like, you know,
too much empty spaces, but it could be used for good. Like.
you could help these people in the communities together. You know, those buildings are there for a reason to be used, and I just feel that like you're there to talk, and you're giving out such a powerful message. Same here with ours.
Yeah.
With Never Alone Together, and I believe those buildings should be filled with this type of thing.
It says it all, doesn't it? Never Alone Together, and then you've got very empty pockets of our society. You know, some communities that are struggling with that sort of community spirit because of, you know, maybe they're in sort of like areas of deprivation, or, you know, I mean, you know, you look at things like what happened with the Mayors riot and things like that. You know, there are pockets of, you know, our brilliant city that, you know, I'm a Swansea boy myself, born and bred. And you just want to kind of say, oh, we could just do this and do that. I think that's where it comes down to the community spirit. I think we just need to do more to help people. You know, you can do things like creating social enterprises, or working with local charities. Say, yeah, I'll run a drop-in shop at the local community hall, or, you know, I'm working with a bunch of guys. We want to do a walk and talk, so that we've always got somewhere to go and someone to talk to. They are so easy things to do. And I just think we need to just put some information on a plate to people to say, this is what you need to get that sort of stuff up and running. And then the right people will come forward. Yeah. They'll come looking for those opportunities to lead on that stuff.
Yeah.
And like yourselves, like what you're doing with the podcast is helping to get those messages to those people so that they'll come forward and go, I need help. I want to be part of this.
And the community thing is really important, I think, isn't it? Because when we were growing up, everybody knew each other, didn't they?
Yeah.
And like,
indeed.
There'd always be someone around that you could like turn to or whatever. And you felt together. But like, I think today the youngsters especially, not just the youngsters but the older people as well, that they feel separated, and I think they're scared to like work together,
communicate, isn't it?
And I think they're getting the wrong end of the stick of each other.
It's the other side of what you were saying, Ian, about the good stuff we had through things like the pandemic, of, you know, that sort of community coming together, etc.
You had move away from that now.
That's it. Now we're into things like, well, that left a lot of people feeling isolated, a lot of loneliness, a lot of people developing mental health conditions as a result of what they went through, you know, the grief they experienced, you know, and things like that. So it is really challenging. It's certainly not easy to kind of pull whole communities together and bandy around a common cause. Yeah. But it needs, you know, community leaders, community activists, you know, people like yourselves who are saying, no, I'm representing this community, I'm putting my voice out there, and I'm trying to instill that sense of togetherness that is going to help people come through. So the more of us that are doing this sort of stuff, the easier it's going to be for people.
Have you got any aims for the future? Have you thought about this and where you want to be with it? Maybe 5-10 years, or have you had any thoughts about that? How far you want to go?
Oh, definitely. I'm ambitious for an idea like this because I see the value in it. I see the chance you've got to, you know, particularly with the internet and with everything that we've got available technology-wise, which we didn't have when we were kids, chaps. So for me, it's about putting as many voices out there as possible, putting as many stories out there as possible. And if I could get to a point where, for whatever, you know, website or online forum or whatever it is, you know, almost like a notice board where anyone can go in and go, right, I'm struggling with depression. Here's someone who has gone through what I've been through. Yeah. I can have a look at their story and pick out of it things that are going to inspire me. And if we could get to a point somehow where in any community, and not just for mental health, for lots of different very important causes, we could do that.
Every business, I think, every workplace should have up on its board, you're for mental health or something, who you can go to, but not just one, maybe a few different options, you know what I mean, for groups or just for talks, walks. And so I think not enough is done in our businesses locally, or maybe across the country, maybe.
There are certainly some fantastic organisations out there who are trying to put mental health at the forefront of the way they manage their workforce, and some of the sort of, I don't know, staff help schemes and the initiatives that are run, you know, they put occupational health stuff, you know, counselling, they put lots of services in place for their staff. But I think it's broader than that. I think because sometimes you have to look at it from a personal perspective, you know, you have to look at it from a in work perspective. Sometimes it's relationships. Like you say, there's so many different ways that people can be affected or people's mental health can be affected. That we want all of those sources of support to be very easy to access, very easy for people to reference. And I know there is a website that the local health board run for children and young people that provides access to all sorts of resources for mental health. And you can literally click on it and go, I want to know more about depression or whatever. And it'll tell you, right, okay, so here's some information, here's some organizations that are working in your area, those sort of things. And I think it's building that sort of information up there, building that sort of intelligence that tells us not just where the problems are, but so that we can share where the solutions or the ways of helping people might be.
Yeah. And do you have any talks coming up at all of...
I haven't got anything on the books at the minute, actually. It's gone a bit quiet. But what I'm really keen to do is I've got a website that I'm sort of relaunching in April. Part of that is going to be to offer people the chance for me just to come along and talk at things like staff awareness events and away days and things like that. I think almost by targeting directly mental health and doing things like World Mental Health Day, I mean, it's obviously a very important link. But, you go to things like national conferences. I've been to conferences in Cardiff and places like that. And obviously that's the right time because everybody there is interested in mental health. But what you want to do is get to, people who are just having an away day with their, 100 staff. And they've never thought about mental health before. Smaller groups, smaller organisations maybe. I think that's where you could start building up, and then you could see the ripple effect of them spreading that message and imparting that wisdom throughout not just their workforce but their families and friends and everything else. So I'm definitely keen to do more of that now this year come in, because as a public speaker, what you're trying to do is instill change in people. You're trying to light a fire underneath them, and that's all I want to do is go out there and get in front of as many people as possible and say the words that are going to get them to change their conversation about mental health.
Well, but you can share your website with the listeners as well if you want to.
It's just themanup.org, and there's lots of contact details on there for things on me, like I'm on Twitter and all that sort of stuff, so people can always get in touch with me that way. I also have the separate email for my writing, leecambule.com. If people are ever interested, particularly like say the book that I've written, it's really a message about teenage mental health, and I think that is a really interesting one for people to do.
I'll have to check that out, definitely.
It's amazing you've come on another chat with us today, mate. They've been inspiration to loads of people, and to see you after 20 years I haven't seen you is to where you are now, mate. This amazing story you've given us.
You've done brilliant for yourself as well.
You've got a last point you want to make to our listeners out there, if they're feeling, if they're struggling and got no one to talk to?
There's always one piece of advice that I take away, and I did a video campaign which you could find as well as reachout.org, I think, and I did a video about living with depression, and I said in that video the thing that really kind of inspired me and the thing that really has driven me is the fact that it's the small acts that make the biggest difference. Small acts of kindness, small acts of just listening, having a cup of coffee with someone.
They go a long way.
They can go a huge way to someone, to supporting someone with mental health. And like I say, for me, when I was growing up, things like my sister phoning my parents seemed like a small part of that story, but now I realise it was the trigger for my path to recovery. For any of you listeners out there, I think it's always helpful to think of the fact that you will struggle with opening up, because it's not easy to talk about these things. Men find it difficult to talk about how they're feeling. It's in our nature, it's in our DNA, the whole hunter-gatherer stuff that we were kind of grown up with, and it's evolved through the years. But when you get to that point that you find the right situation with the right person, that you can have a conversation with them about mental health, that can be the start of your path to recovery. So I encourage everyone just to keep looking for that, keep asking, to keep being not afraid to talk up, and then you will find that eventually.
That is absolutely brilliant. And all the links that we've got got off here, we'll add them into the podcast as
Very
well,
kind
in
of
the
that.
description.
If you get anything comes up as well, send us a message and we'll share it on with our website
Definitely,
as well. So.
definitely, and same as well. I'll make sure that this podcast is so important for doing what you're doing, and yeah, I'll share as well, and we'll get the message out there, guys.
We do ask one more thing before we go. We do ask our guests on if you have a dark moment, if you feel him having those bad days, is there any music you turn to, listen to help you out of it?
Particular songs that
It's going to be like my childhood sort of stuff. I mean, I grew up with like Oasis and all of that, and for me,
the same. Go back, then you go back to what
you go
listened
back to a time when you felt comfortable. And again, that's sort of 13, 14, 15 years old when I was starting to notice the change. And songs like Wonderwall by Oasis is the one that always resonates with me, because on the surface of it, it seems like quite a sort of a dark, sort of melancholy sort of song. But I listen to the words and I see the positivity in that message. And for me, that one always kind of takes me back to a time when I knew who I was a bit more. Yeah. But it's so personal. For me, that is just the thing that resonates with me. Now I find music that keeps me positive. I try to listen to the songs that mean something to me personally, like, wedding songs, my wife and I had, when we walked down the aisle, and really happy with that. The songs that mean a lot to my son, because my son is so important part of my life. So I try to connect the songs to the emotions that mean the most to me, and then those are the songs that I hold on to.
That's brilliant. We'll add that to our playlist as well.
Thank you very much, Lee. It's been amazing coming on.
Much.
Big inspiration to all who listening out there. And we'll see you next time on Who Never Alone Together podcast.
Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you, mate.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.